Hello readers, welcome back to Tale Between Tales. Today we are at long last going to be doing a review of Theft of Swords. Sorry this took me so long to get out. I took a break over the Christmas vacation. I had all of my kids home, and so I am playing a bit of catch up, and as I only put out one video a week because my schedule is all over the place and I never know how much time exactly I'm going to have. I know this one's coming out to you a little bit late, as I've talked about it several times in some previous videos, but it's finally here and we're going to dig in. Theft of Swords is written by Michael J. Sullivan, and it is a story about two exceptional thieves named Hadrian and Royce. I listened to this book on audio, and it's narrated by Tim Gerard Reynolds, and he does an excellent job at narrating. I really enjoyed listening to his narration, and it's very engaging to listen to. He does a pretty good job with all the voices. He has a unique voice for Hadrian and for Royce, and he tries to give all of his other characters at least some kind of a little flourish so you can tell who's speaking, some little tweak, so that way it's not all the same or all the plain. Even his narrator voice is separate, and his Myron the monk voice is very unique. So that was pretty fun to listen to as well. And he just does a stand-up job. So this is definitely one I would recommend the audiobook experience for. But also, that having been said, when I was writing this review and I was kind of looking things up, names and spellings and stuff to jog my memory, there were things that I definitely did not recognize. I was like, oh, that's how you say it. So just real quick, there is a character, and I could have sworn his name was, and I'll write it up here, Ezra Hardin, because that's how it's pronounced, Ezra Hardin. But when I was looking it up, I was like, who is this person that keeps popping up all over the place? I was like, oh, it's Ezra Hardin. It's one word, and it's spelled this way. And so that was kind of mind-blowing too. So I do think that, at least for me personally, sometimes seeing it and consuming it visually helps my memory a little bit better and helps me with the recognition, even though the audio is great for pronunciation and story consuming. Sometimes reading epic fantasy, I had to look more things up for this review than I did for some of my other reviews that I read paperback for. Just, it didn't stick in my brain quite as well. So this world is your typical Middle Ages fantasy world, and it is split into several different kingdoms, each with their own monarchy on the throne, followed by the aristocracy or the nobility. And of course, underneath them, you've got the merchants and the artisans, and below them, of course, are the peasants and the working class. The people in this society are largely organized by guilds. You have, of course, the Merchant Guild, the Artisan Guild, and of course, the Thieving Guild, which becomes relevant as our two main characters are actually working outside of the Thieving Guild, and that's seen as something extraordinary because normal thieves couldn't do that. However, our main characters are really the best of the best, and that is evident right off the bat in like the very first opening chapter. They are their own little organization, and they call themselves Rayera. Of course, permeating everything throughout the society is religion, and the Church of Nephron has its fingers all in everything. And I really enjoyed learning about the theology and the mythology of this world, and I think that the way that Sullivan wrote it into his book was very engaging and interesting for the reader at the point in time that he decided to reveal that, and the characters he used to do that I thought was really well written. In this world, you also see your classic fantasy creatures or races. You see, of course, the humans, and most of our time is spent with the humans. There's also the elves and the dwarves, and they're all pretty stereotypical fantasy creatures, whereas the elves, they're going to be long living, they're going to be very fair, they have excellent hearing and eyesight and all of that. And then the dwarves, they live underground, they excel at metalworking and stoneworking, and each race has a religious lore associated with them, which adds a lot of richness to Sullivan's world. And while we primarily focus on the humans, we do catch glimpses of them throughout the book. And Sullivan does an excellent job at crafting unique and believable characters. The elves are not really so much seen in this book as a pure race in and of themselves. Instead, it really focuses more on the half-elves or the half-elven descendants, people who have only maybe a little bit of elven blood in their system. And these people are really the outcasts of society. They're not allowed to live in the villages and in the cities. They're out in the wilderness and people don't want to trade with them, and they're very much looked down upon. They're viewed as less than human. A lot of them lack basic human needs and basic human rights, and a lot of them are just desperate for survival. A lot of them are on the verge of starvation, and they face a lot of persecution in the book. You also learn about the ancient empire and the last emperor before it was shattered, and along with that ancient empire and the shattering of it, you have lost knowledge and lost magic. You have a group of knights that were exceptionally skilled fighters, and that art has also been lost, and this knowledge and these techniques have been lost for centuries. And so what you have in today's society is a watered down version of magic, and you don't have those exceptional fighting skills. You do read about how one family has been able to retain one secret of this elite fighting source, and that's given them an edge in like the dueling arena and areas like that. They become very, very dangerous fighters to everybody else around who doesn't know even this one technique. There are not very many magic practitioners in the current world. There are a few, but most of what they know is pretty superficial, and society doesn't have a very good viewpoint towards them. A lot of them are kind of seen as practicing black magic, and it's kind of shunned. In a lot of ways, I think it's good to go into this book without even really knowing much about the plot and much about the setup, because I think that the beginning is a lot more interesting and a lot more intriguing that way. And so I'm not going to be saying very much about the plot at large, rather talking more about the world and the writing. And so what I do want to say about the book is that it's actually split into two books, which is something that might be good to know going in, because as I was reading through it, I was totally thrown because I was getting like halfway through the book and I was like, wait a second, we've already hit the climax of the book and we're in the resolution phase and I still have half of the book to go. What is going on? And so that is something to know. You will get two complete separate books within this one, and both stories are really great. I actually enjoyed the first story more than the second story, but the second story is still very fun. I really enjoyed the writing style and the adventures and the twists and turns. This series gets a 9 out of 10 for language, and there are not a whole lot of swear words. There are a few, but they are few and far between, and so that's why it gets the 9 out of 10. And I give this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I pretty much loved everything about this book. It was well written, had a great plot, great story, great characters. I highly recommend this trilogy to all fantasy lovers. It is a definitely epic fantasy, right up my alley. Some of the stuff that I love the best. And that will conclude our spoiler-free discussion of this book. We are going to head into spoilers now and really kind of discuss some of the things that happen in this book and talk about it a little bit before we jump into and move on to the Rise of Empire. And so let's get started. I'm babbling a little bit just to give you some extra time, because I know sometimes I wash the dishes and have to pull off my kitchen gloves before I can turn the phone off. So we don't want any spoilers. And so, all right, your last warning, here we go. Spoiler discussion of Theft of Swords. So I was, like I said, in the non-spoiler section, really happy that I did not know how the beginning of this book went. I feel like it's really easy to say that Hadrian and Royce are hired for a job and end up being accused of the king's murder, but then get released by the princess and hired by her to kidnap her brother to keep him safe while she works on figuring out who the traitor is. And this is how the story begins, and that launches the adventure, because it really is the beginning parts of the story. But I feel like the beginning parts of the story and the tension that you experience with Hadrian and Royce going into the castle is a lot higher, and you don't really know, even though you know that they're not going to die when they get captured, because they're our main characters and that would be really weird. You know that you don't know, I mean to say, how exactly they're going to get out of their situation and what all is going to go down. And if you already know that the princess is going to come and release them, then it's not as suspenseful and it doesn't hit as hard. And so I really enjoyed listening to all of that. And even though I was like, well, you know, something's fishy with this mission that they're on, this is not going to go well. And as soon as you see the king dead, I knew that they were going to get blamed for it, that the whole thing had been a setup and that they were being framed. But you still didn't know, I still didn't know how it was going to play out. How are they going to get out of the dungeon? You know they got to get out somehow, but how are they going to get out? And what is that going to look like? And so it was really fun coming down, and then you see Arista's side of everything and that she knows that they're innocent. And you're like, oh, now they've picked up the prince and they're off on their adventure. And I really enjoyed their interactions with the prince at the beginning. They like knock him out and she's like, please be careful with my brother. They're like, stupid prince. So I really liked their interactions. And I feel like moments like this are experienced much better when you experience them organically through reading the story. The setup and the way that Sullivan wrote it was also really interesting for me and kept me on my toes in that I didn't know who the traitor was going to be. Kept going back. Is it Arista? Is it not Arista? Is it Arista? Is it not Arista? And every little piece of information that was revealed made me switch sides every single time. So like the beginning, you're like, oh, she's saving him. And then Ulrich is like, oh, she's been jealous our whole life. And she's the one that's trying to take the throne. You're like, oh, well, maybe she is. But then in the next scene, you're like, oh, now it doesn't look like she is. And then in the next scene, you're like, oh, she's being super suspicious. Maybe she is the traitor. And this back and forth was done really, really well. And even though it's kind of a well-known strategy to like deter the attention from your real villain to this other person who is getting all of the attention, and you could easily be like, oh, well, it's obviously not going to be them because we're talking about them so much and the author's trying to get us to pay attention to them. Just the way that it was written, I didn't really think about that at all because there was just such compelling evidence for both sides until it actually was revealed that it was Percy Braga who was the traitor. And in the way that it was done with, you know, Ulrich has gone through this whole journey to free Ezra and then you know that he's in a band of bad people, that he's not in a group of soldiers that are rescuing him. Like, you know that, and of course Hadrian and Royce know that. And so then when he's like, oh, my uncle is going to make you pay, because his uncle has always been the one that has stood by him and been his moral support and stepped in when his mom died. And then to have it revealed that his uncle is the one that betrayed him and hired the assassins, it hits a lot harder than if it had been Arista. So I'm really glad that it wasn't Arista, because their relationship from the beginning was fraught with tension. And it would have been kind of no big deal for even the reader to be like, oh, well, it's the sister. And I mean, even at the beginning when I was like, oh, the uncle, and he's like next in line after, because of course that's been done a lot too, where it's, you have an uncle or a brother that wants to take the throne. Of course, this is all throughout history and all throughout literature. And so not knowing exactly who it was that wanted the throne, even after it's revealed by Esarhaddon that the church was ultimately behind the murder of his father, we don't know who their agent is, and we don't know which person is working with the church. And then I liked how, because it wasn't Arista, now those two, they can really work on healing their relationship, and their sibling rivalries are set aside as they really band together to have to rule this kingdom and overcome this threat. And the concern that Ulrich has for his sister in that moment when he finds out what Percy's plot is to pin the murders and accuse her of using black magic and getting the people more to revolt against her, and how he wants to save her from that. It kind of tugs at your heartstrings a bit, and you're really, really rooting for them, and you really want them to succeed in saving her. I keep saying you, but I really mean me. Because I get that you might have different opinions than me. So I need to be better at that. Then we'll talk about just Myron real quick. I really enjoyed Myron's character. When at first I heard that he had a photographic memory, I'm like, oh, that's such an overused trope. Why does he have to have a photographic memory? It solves all these problems. And while it does kind of solve an immediate problem, I thought that Sullivan handled it well in a way that it doesn't solve every problem. Yes, it helps them find the prison because he's the only monk left alive and they were gonna find the prison at this monastery anyway. And so it helps move the plot forward to have the one person left alive be one of the people that could actually know about this super secret prison. And so it solves the problem, and it also gives us information. He's the way that we're introduced to all of the theology, which I think is very appropriate, because even if he didn't have a photographic memory, obviously he's been raised by the monks, and so this theology has been drilled into him from an early age. He's going to be well versed in it. And as they're discussing this theology, as they're approaching the prison, it makes a lot of sense because the prison is manned by the church, and they're of course confused as to why the church would want this prison and the church would be in charge of it for just one person. So you kind of get like a history and a theology lesson all at once, but I still found it very interesting to listen to and to learn about at that point in time. You also just have to feel so bad for Myron. I mean, he definitely went through this very traumatic event with watching all of his friends and his family in the monastery burn, and he has such a deep guilt for not standing up and doing something about it because he was trying to protect his father. And he has these very horrible internal struggle of, have I betrayed them? You know, I'm done with life, and he doesn't want to move on. And I like how Hadrian and Royce versus Ulrich come to help Myron. Ulrich in this moment is still very authoritative, and he just says, Myron, I'm commanding you to come with me. I'm going to promote you, and we're going to go. And he doesn't understand the deeper troubles that Myron is experiencing, whereas Hadrian and Royce, who have been around the block and have lived with the lower class and have lived, amongst humanity, really they're the ones that can reach him and can comfort him and can pull him out of his misery and say, you need to come with us. There's nothing for you here, and this isn't your fault. Like, he needs to hear that, and he needs to have someone who's compassionate, which is also interesting that it comes from our thieves, who are, typically going to be the bad guys. And that's another thing that I loved about this book, is how it takes the people who are seen, as the criminals or maybe the bad guys, and flips that around and really turns them into, these are the ones that are the good guys, and these are the ones that are our heroes. Even though we see all the nobility admits, oh yeah, I've hired them for this and I've hired them for that. They're great. And so Ulrich is like, you've been holding out on me information. I didn't know who you guys really were. Everybody in here has apparently hired you before for one thing or another. And so it's pretty funny. And looping back around to freeing Ezra from the prison, I loved that whole sequence. It was really fun. Like, they didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what was going on. We meet Ezra, and he's like, oh, by the way, you've just been imprisoned. And Esarhaddon is just so smart that he is able to manipulate events and orchestrate his freedom, even though he is in this prison, because he knows how people are going to react. He knows if I show favoritism towards the king and help him recover from this sickness, that will make him a target, and then the church will kill him, and then he can get his daughter to tell his son, to come to Esarhaddon in the prison, and then the church is going to want to imprison the son because he could be the heir of Nephron. And then because they've imprisoned them all together, Ulrich, of course, is going to want to escape, and the only way to do that is to free Esarhaddon. And so he's a genius. He's pretty much a mastermind, and that was just an excellent layer of subterfuge. And then, of course, with Ezra leaving like immediately after the prison scene, at first I was like, wait a second, what? He's leaving? He can't be leaving. He's obviously a super important character, but he wasn't necessary for the arc of the first book. And I'm glad that the second book cycled back around to him and we get to see what all he is up to and what he's doing. And I appreciated how right at the get-go, we get Ulrich's adventure and his growth and maturity into being the king. And he very quickly, the events of this very quickly forces him to grow up and grow out of that carefree, kind of snobbish prince persona and into the responsible, there are things going on that are bigger than me, there are people I love that are in danger, and I need to step up. I thought it was a great moment when Ulrich sees that his people are killing his people. He's like, we're fighting against our own people. These are my own guards. And he says, this is going to stop. And against the better wisdom of his companions, he rides off and he shouts at the gates, I am the king and you are going to stop. And he stops the fighting and he stops further death. And of course, that gets the civilians to really rally around him, and it bolsters him in their sight. The rescue of Arista from the tower definitely had me on edge. That was such a fun scene to read. I especially love the part where Hadrian and Royce send the letter to Braga and like Valentine is there just like, oh, she's gone, they totally swindled you. And so that was really fun to see how, you know, the events of the beginning kind of got tied back in, because you know Valentine is just a sleazy character. We don't really like him, but he was pretty fun for teasing Braga in that moment. And that whole scene was great and was really fun. And there were times where, even though I figured that obviously Royce was going to survive, I wasn't sure if he was going to actually succeed in rescuing Arista and getting her out of there. I'm also really glad that Magnus got away, so that way all of the threads weren't tied up, and which is pretty cool because he appears again in the second one, and he ends up playing an important role in the second one. And by second one, I just mean the second story in the first book, not the Empire, not the Rise of Empire yet. And then of course with the elder Pickering father, I forgot his first name, with him being able to be the one to dispatch Braga and finally settle that duel, that dispute over who's the better duelist, that was very satisfying. And then of course seeing the religious figures in the background, you know, immediately flipping and switching their plots and staying on their toes, and they're, oh, I'm on this side and now I'm on this side, and how they're manipulating the people in the room to always come out on top was also very fascinating. However, going now into the second book, I was kind of surprised that they revealed to Arista right away in the beginning of the second book that they were the ones that was behind her father's murder, and they had been plotting with Percy. They're like, oh, we're trying to get her on our side by revealing this information, so that because Esarhaddon is the bigger threat and we need to know if he has contacted her and where he is, because they really want to hunt him down as he has escaped and they don't know where he is or what he's up to. And I just kind of thought that they would sit on that and they wouldn't want Arista to know that they were the ones behind that. So we're going to kind of see how that plays out, I think, in this next book, in the second installment, because that's kind of revealed to Arista and then it's not talked about a whole lot. You get her kind of thinking later, like, oh, what is his name? The priest, the high priest that she's with, Solder, there it is. She's not sure how she feels about him anymore. You know, it's kind of another betrayal where, oh, she's lost her uncle. And now this guy, Solder, who has kind of been like a grandfather to her all of her life, he's also a traitor, but they're spinning it in a way that makes it seem like they were kind of, had the wool pulled over their eyes this whole time. And they were tricked, and they're pinning it on, oh, it was Ezra's fault. And so you have that confrontation. He says, yes, it was my fault, but I really needed to get out. I used you and I'm sorry. well, he doesn't say he's sorry. He's not sorry. He says, yes, I used you, but this is what I needed to do. And she has to sit with that. And I think we'll see more about how that kind of plays out in the second book and the consequences of that. The second book, I feel like, is a little lot more political, with the leaders of the church plotting everything, and I actually found my mind wandering a bit more while in those chapters while they were laying out their plans, and I had to actually go back and listen to the whole thing over again because I didn't pay attention the first time. So, but other than that, the second book was still a lot of fun. I feel like it was a lot slower of a start. Like, okay, Hadrian and Royce are now, they've met up with Thrace, and now we're plotting through, and we gotta get to this little village, and it takes forever to get there. And so I feel like the whole thing takes a really long time to get set up, with going through the church and all their political maneuverings and all of their plots and their plans, and then learning about the competition. And then of course you have Hadrian and Royce's line where they're going to this village, and you find out, of course they're going to the same village to fight the same monster, because they have to get involved. And so I really did enjoy, though, how those two lines intersected, and you knew they were going to. But it took a while to get there. I feel like it took a long time to get it set up and to get there. But afterwards, once Hadrian and Royce finally get to the village, it's still a lot of fun. And fighting the Galilebrek, I listened to it, I still can't even pronounce it. I did enjoy that creature as a magical creature, like inventive, unique fantasy creature. I thought it was something different, something kind of new that took elements of like dragons, but also spun it in a different way. Also, this whole time I was totally expecting Hadrian and Royce to really thwart the church's, their agenda about whoever slays the Galilebrek, I think that's how you say it, is going to be the new emperor. And while Hadrian and Royce don't really mess up their plans at all, they kind of mess up their own plans because their sword wasn't forged correctly. It had, we find out from Magnus that it has stuff on both sides. It has writing on both sides. And then Thrace ends up being the one to kill the Galilebrek. And they just use that and make her the empress. And like, oh, she's a peasant from a backwater village. She doesn't know anything about politics. She's even better than the person that we had originally picked out, because she is going to be very easy to manipulate, and then we can just marry her off to whoever we want to, and then we don't have to worry about her. And they have this whole plan to incite the common people to rally behind her because she comes from them. And like, you read through this, you're like, oh, it's so icky. Like, it's so evil and conniving, and it's just like, oh, I want to hit someone. So I'm super interested to see if in the next book Thrace is as easily manipulated and has as little backbone as they think, because she's pretty strong. Like, she went all the way to find Hadrian and Royce on her own, and she had to really navigate a lot of hard things with her father and her town and the Galilebrek and slaying it. And she's really got a lot of strength to her and a lot of fight. And so it's going to be interesting to see if she does or if she does not kind of get swept up into the role and is easily manipulated by the church, or if she can see through that and she becomes like a hindrance to them and is able to maneuver around and kind of like thwart them in small or maybe even in large ways. Who knows? You could do a lot of things with her character. And then I was also, speaking of the ending, I really, really wanted to see the visions that Ezra and Arista and Royce saw when it was revealed who the heir was and his protector. And I kind of figured out that Hadrian was going to be the protector. I mean, I highly doubt he's the heir. It doesn't specifically say he's the protector, but I mean, he knows all of the forgotten techniques from the ancient swordsmen. So, I mean, while it's entirely possible that, the heir, the protector taught the heir all of the techniques as well as passing them down to his own people, that could have been passed down through both generations. But Ezra says that line about, oh, wouldn't it be great if both the heir and his protector were people that we didn't know. And so I have a feeling that the heir is somebody that we are already familiar with. And Ezra leaves to go find the heir. And so I don't think it's anybody that was, that we're intimately familiar with, that was in that location. So that kind of rules out like, we already know it's not going to be Ulrich and Arista. And I'm pretty sure that Hadrian is the descendant of the protector. He's got the medallion. He's obviously one of the two. I'm pretty sure it's pretty obvious he's the protector. So we don't really know who the heir is. I really, really wanted to know. Not thinking it's Royce, because Royce's reveal was that he is a half-elf, or maybe not half-elf, but he's got elven blood, which was pretty hinted at earlier on. And so I figured that one out too. I mean, he's got like night vision. So, I mean, of course, he can see in the dark. Of course, he's part elf. And also, Ezra leaves. And it's like, well, he wouldn't leave. He's like, okay, I'm leaving to go find the heir. It's like, well, if Royce was the heir, then why would he leave? He wouldn't. So we don't know who that is, but I think it's someone that we've already been introduced to. And so, I think that the heir will probably be revealed at the end of the second book, kind of like the protector was revealed at the end of the first book. That would make a lot of sense to me. And with that, I am excited to start the second book. So that's all I have to say. Let me know what you loved about the book down below in the comments. Make sure to put spoiler beforehand so people who haven't read the book don't accidentally get spoiled by reading the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.